Australia goes to the polls in early July in what's known as a double dissolution election, and this is where the lower and upper houses of Parliament are re-elected. This has the potential to really change the political landscape within Australia, as the Senate is elected on proportional representation and preferential voting is used to select candidates in the lower house. Over the past 18 months, there have been a number of changes in the Australian defence environment, and this has included the formation of the Capability Acquisition Sustainment Group, which came out of the First Principles Review. The First Principles Review was aimed at identifying areas for reform within the Australian defence procurement process, and as a result, the Defence Materiel Organisation was merged into the Department of Defence and became the Capability Acquisition Sustainment Group. Additionally, the Australian government delivered a white paper in early 2016, which had initially been promised for some time between late 2014 and mid-2015. Alongside the Defence White Paper, there was also the Integrated Investment Program, which outlined a number of new programs and the budgets and so forth that were associated with that, and a new industrial policy statement, which helps to identify areas for building up Australia's industrial base. Overall, a lot has changed since the last Defence White Paper was released in 2013. Australia has since pulled out of Afghanistan, although it still maintains a small force there, and the country is also working with coalition partners in Iraq against Islamic State. On top of that, Australia has had to deal more closely with the terrorism threat, with a number of major attacks thwarted and plots broken up in major cities, as well as the Lindt Cafe siege in Sydney in late 2014. Furthermore, the government has continued to work with Pacific Island partners to help build security and capability in those areas, as can be seen through the Pacific Patrol Boat Program, and it's having to deal with the issue of its relations with China, particularly due to the increase in military activity in the South China Seas. And China is a major economic partner for Australia, and this creates a balancing act that the government has to deal with, no matter which party comes into power. So prior to the release of the Defence White Paper, significant progress was made on a number of naval procurements, particularly with the initiation of the rolling build concept to avoid the Valley of Death. Once the White Paper came out and the budget later on in May, we were able to get better clarity on what was happening with naval procurement, in particular the offshore patrol boat replacement and the future frigate, as well as the submarine build, which is going to be one of the largest and most complex in Australian history. So naturally, naval procurement has been one of the largest winners in Australian defence procurement policy over the last 6 to 8 months. Beyond that, there's also the Land 400 program, Phase 2, which is currently in an evaluation phase, and that's going to be valued at about 4 to 5 billion Australian dollars. This is going to replace the country's fleet of ASLAV wheeled armoured vehicles, and the Phase 3 of the Land 400 program is going to replace the M113 armoured personnel carriers, which is also going to have a similar or even higher cost, building that out to be one of the largest programs in Australian procurement history. In addition to this, the Defence White Paper also had a strong focus on intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance assets, and helping to build Australia's capabilities in this field. Most recently, in December, the Australian government sought to buy, through the Foreign Military Sales Program, a number of electronic warfare aircraft from the US, which are converted Gulfstreams. There are also a few interesting little procurements that were picked up in the Defence White Paper, which are more on the horizon, not quite so immediate. These include a mobile rocket artillery system, which is going to have a range of up to 300 kilometres, light attack and surveillance helicopters fused by special forces, a new revived air defence system, and a replacement of the Tiger attack helicopters in the mid-2020s, with potentially augmenting this replacement system with unmanned aerial vehicles as well. The release of the Defence White Paper provided the government with the opportunity to provide some real changes, and also to challenge the status quo and move forward some of these key procurements that have been sitting in the pipeline for some time. The government also committed to a core defence expenditure, so excluding pensions, of 2% of GDP, which is something that has been sought after for some time but not necessarily delivered on, and is quite important to a number of Australia's allies. So looking at defence spending through to 2020, we can see that there's a slight dip this year in 2016, but the main trend is for procurement to increase over the coming years. Spending on military personnel is to continue to take up the bulk of the defence budget, with operations and maintenance spending, and procurement to move into a more equal footing in the years ahead. However, that said, operational expenditure can increase depending on international deployments. Taking a closer look at the procurement figures, the Royal Australian Air Force is set to receive the bulk of defence spending as a number of major programs beginning to move through to delivery, such as the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter and the P-8 Poseidon. Naval procurement will also increase through the period as other programs such as the Fleet Support Vessel and Pacific Patrol Boat begin to be funded. Looking at the figures from the Defence White Paper, the government has signalled a continued increase in defence expenditure, which is going to exceed 50 billion Australian dollars in nominal terms in 10 years' time. The 2% GDP target is expected to be hit sometime in the early 2020s, economic conditions pending. However, procurement execution is going to be an issue that the Australian government is going to have to continue to wrestle with in order to deliver the capabilities and requirements for the military, as well as those promises to the electorate, on time and on budget.